Welcome to 5 to 50, Financial Strategies for Growing Companies, the podcast that gives business owners and entrepreneurs the tools to scale with confidence. I'm your host, Jeff Rudner. In every episode, we unpack proven strategies that optimize finances, improve cash flow, and leverage technology that all drive growth. So whether you're a founder, a CEO, or an advisor supporting businesses, you'll hear from proven experts and leaders sharing experiences and insights that you can use to help your company thrive. Let's build smarter, scale faster, and take our business to the next level.
Hey everyone, it is an absolute honor to welcome our first guest on the pod. I've known Adam for about 25 years now, and I've been a big fan of his career and all of his major accomplishments along the way. I'm super excited for this one. As one of his first ventures, Adam was the co-founder and former CEO of TeePublic, where he scaled to $130 million in revenue before being acquired by Redbubble. Amazing. His expertise extends into advisory roles for companies like Bombas and Attentive, and board memberships at Spark Networks and F. Schumacher & Co. He's currently founder and CEO of Parable, where he's working on the very small task of optimizing time for companies, which is awesome to hear, and I'm excited to dive in there. So I'm super excited to welcome Adam Schwartz to the pod. Adam, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, Jeff.
Yeah, you too. So I want to take it back a ways a little bit, and I want to talk about Source for Style, first venture. Do you always know that you were going to be an entrepreneur, or did you happen into it by accident?
No, I always knew. I think it's a fairly common story, for a lot of entrepreneurs. I would, go to Costco on the weekends and buy big bulk candy and sell it on the bus. And, even when we were in college together, I was always scheming, with like little, I would do that flyer, like we'd go get a bunch of flyers for their local restaurants and get a bunch of the fraternity brothers to go, hand them out at the condos and stuff like that. So I was always doing stuff like that. And I think I also knew that I was going to have to go in the back door. I don't know why I thought that, but I was like, no, I just felt like I was going to have to make my own way.
Yeah, that's awesome. So at Source for Style, tell us a little bit about that and what drew you to apparel and e-commerce.
So my first job was at a PR agency, and I kind of it's called Group SJR. I kind of walked in the door, and I said, "You should have a guy that does social media marketing for your PR clients." This is 2008. And they literally laughed me out of the room. They're like, "That's nobody needs that." And I said, "Okay, well, why don't you just ask your clients, and if they want it, it's an upsell, and we'll split it or something." One of their clients wanted the service, and she was in the sustainable fashion space, and she had written a book. And I started working with her, and through that process, started learning about the inefficiencies and challenges of apparel sourcing, and particularly in sustainable apparel sourcing. And it was, this is 2009. And I think it was a time when it was as easy to say, okay, that's a problem. How does the internet solve that problem? Let's go do that. And sort of, the two of us decided to break off and go start it. And what was funny about it is my whole family comes from the textile industry. Like in Brooklyn, where I was then living and where our offices were. Our offices were off, people are from New York, off of Messerol, and my grandfather used to walk that street and sell textiles in the 40s. And then I was there in an old textile warehouse, trying to digitize the whole thing. So it was a really fun, but I did not mean to do that. It was sort of just happened.
It's incredible how you ended up in the same place that your family was, with a new idea, but doing the same thing. What do you think back through that what is that? What are the thoughts that go through your head thinking through that kind of circumstance, and how your entrepreneurial journey kind of brought you back, going forward, brought you back?
I think it's a good lesson. I mean, and I think, and we'll get to this, but as you start to think about, AI, and you're wondering what's going to happen, I think that the past is a far better teacher for that than you might think. I think all of this has happened before. It's like, okay, this is a different version. And I think it's easy to get pretty caught up and feel like everything that's happening now is so new and different. And I think if you're really getting into the details, it's like, okay, there are past is prologue. So
Absolutely.
I think that that's true. And even when I would, this is, at that time, my grandfather was still alive, and I would tell him what we were doing, and I would tell him what the problems were. They were the same problems, essentially, that he had. Problems around inventory management, problems around, that's a physical / digital business. So that's part of it. But he was able to sort of pick up on the core issues in the business immediately at 90 years old.
Right. And so, that's going to take me to my next question is we'll come back to what you're doing now at Parable in a second, but I'm interested in your perspective on the things that you've seen through your journey as entrepreneur, advisor, investor, now founder again, and trying to thread the commonalities of the hats that you're wearing. And so, what aspects do you appreciate most about the different hats that you're wearing, that you've worn? And how can an entrepreneur starting now take away or take the perspective of, hey, sometimes I need to be an advisor. Sometimes I need to think like an investor. Sometimes I need to be an operator, and the different hats that they're putting on. How have you kind of navigated that throughout your career?
Well, I think for me, that's the fun part. I think that, for me is really interesting. I think that as an entrepreneur, you don't need to be the best at any of those things. And so my view on it has always been like, this is so easy. Like, I don't need to be the most incredible version, the most expert version at any one of those sort of different functional areas that you just said. I need to be just good enough at all of them to push this thing up the hill. And so I think when framed like that, it's like, okay, I just need to be pretty good at a lot of things. I don't need to be perfect at anything. And I think that's broadly true. That is just a truism in entrepreneurship.
That's interesting.
If I was giving advice to somebody who's coming out of a corporate job, it would probably be that you can't make perfect the enemy of good, that speed matters more than efficiency in entrepreneurship and in early stage businesses. If you're not, 100 times faster than the incumbent, then you have no advantage. That's the only advantage you could possibly have, is that you're more flexible and faster than whoever you're trying to beat up. And I think the other thing that I've learned, probably the best lesson I learned from starting different businesses, from investing in early stage businesses and advising different businesses, just like hanging around, a lot of these sorts of things, is that every successful entrepreneur that I know does it differently. And I think one of the differences between being an entrepreneur and some other fields is when you go into a corporate job, you're often molded and they're asking you to perform in a certain kind of way that's like relative to their structure. As an entrepreneur, I think the only way that it works is that the entrepreneur is doing what is intuitive to them, and the thing that is intuitive to them is right for the market. You have to do it your way. And if I think about, Dave, the founder of Bombas, or Brian, the founder of Attentive, and these are hugely successful companies, or myself, like, we all have a different style and different things that we really focus on. And so I think you can get distracted listening to, people like me or someone else saying, oh, you should do it like this, or this is how entrepreneurship works. There is I do believe that there's a craft of it. I think there is a craft of entrepreneurism, but I think there has to be something innate that is speaking to the entrepreneur that they're following. Otherwise, it's just too hard.
Interesting. And I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago about not being perfect or not being the best at everything in the business. I think this runs counter to a lot of the narrative we hear for entrepreneurs thinking that they need to be the best salesperson in the business. They need to be the best operations person. How do you solve for those things in a business, or how do you solve for your shortcomings as an entrepreneur if you're not the best at these things?
I think the misconception is that being the best at all of those things is what will be required to win. Ultimately, you need to hire someone who is the best at those things. But I think that where the sort of broader narrative gets a little muddier versus my experience is that in the beginning, when you're simply trying to find product market fit, I very much believe in the lean startup methodology. I believe in iterating. I believe in moving fast. And I believe in putting out product and work that you're not proud of in order to get feedback from the market. So when I say you don't need to be the best, the beauty of the lean startup methodology is that you don't have to put out the best work. You can put out work that you think is subpar and then get feedback to that and then iterate. And so that's the easy path in my mind. I think a lot of people get caught up in sort of giving lip service to that methodology, but not really doing it, not moving fast enough, not putting out work that is really half-baked, because they don't feel like it's ready. And I think that's every time I've made that mistake, everyone makes that mistake. Every time I've done it, I regret it and wish I had just put something out sooner and earlier and faster. And so that's where I think you don't have to be the best. It's just iterate and experiment faster.
And does that mindset or does that approach to running a business change through the seasons of a business as the company grows? Do they need to scale back testing and speed? From a company that's doing $5 to $50 million in revenue, somewhere in that range, does the approach to testing and scale and speed change, or is it, that's the ethos of a good company?
I'll sort of split my answer. So I definitely think once you start finding product market fit, and I think if you really do have something, the market is going to tell you. And the product won't need to be perfect. And I'm talking about software here. Broadly speaking, if you send people, and I've been in apparel, obviously, if you send people really bad apparel products, that's not going to work. But if you're talking about digital products, if you're on to something, the market's going to tell you, even if your product's not perfect, because you've struck upon a need that is resonant, and the market should pull you towards whatever you're doing. If you're always trying to make your own wind, in my experience, it will never work. All the good businesses I've ever been around, and I've been around plenty of bad ones and started bad ones, within the first 2 years, it starts to feel like something is pushing you. And so that's the phase that I'm really talking about. You got to get to that point where there's wind. Okay. Now we need to bring in people who are better. Perhaps as we're scaling and we have a larger organization, we need someone who's really good at ops, or I think expertise in all of those areas. Then you want to sort of layer in really quickly. However, the one thing that I would say, specifically to your question about testing, is that the other experience that I've had it through board work, and sort of getting to the board or the executive level at the sort of 9-figure revenue scale, is that a lot of companies reach that scale and then start to operate like companies who have billion-dollar scale. And it's the same mistake as the startup. If you're a couple $100 million company, your core advantage is still speed over the multi-billion-dollar multinational still. And so I don't think it's appropriate to get too slow too quickly. Like you have to. The companies that really make it are the ones who can manage to keep a beginner's mind and a startup mentality and a flexibility, a long way into and not feel like, not try to get too fancy and feel like they're too big for that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense a lot, completely. But I do think that, I think that 2 year, that kind of threshold or that goalpost, or if it's some sort of signal in the business that there comes a time where there needs to be some sort of infrastructure and processes from a quality standpoint. But you don't want to lose. You want to build the systems and processes that work, that allow you to continue to iterate and continue to test and continue to scale. Is that what you found?
Yeah, I think at that point, and I love operations and I love systems and I love frameworks for running businesses. And I think at that point, you want to start designing those, but the goal of those should be to make the company go faster, not slower. So in other words, once you have 50 people, if you have no systems, that could slow you down. So it's like, what are the systems that speeds up 50 people? And I think this is very hard to get right. But a rule that we had at TeePublic was like, any process that we introduce, we should be able to answer, like, how does this company-wide process or this team-wide process make us go faster? If it makes us go slower, we should question it.
That's great. And what are some, do you want an example of something you introduced that helped you go faster and something that you found slowed you down?
Yeah. I think to go faster, as we got larger, we wanted to create really clear direction and alignment in terms of what were the focal points, what were the things that we wanted out of certain teams. So sometimes people will be like, well, you should you can let the teams figure that out. And I think you can let the teams figure out how to get the job done. But I think you need to be, particularly when you're still in early stage, one of the advantages and one of the ways to go fast is to be really clear about, what the goalpost is and what you need out of that team, and then let them figure out the how. So you're responsible for the what, and they're responsible for the how. And you should have, as a founder, and for a pretty long time, I think that's something that you should be able to dictate pretty well and know what the company needs, from a contribution. So I think making that clear, getting everybody super aligned on the what, but then not creating too much bureaucracy in the how, saying, hey, you're free, you've got tons of flexibility, here's your budget, here's your team, you get to decide how you do this, but we're just telling you what we need, is an example of sort of splitting the difference between creating some structure and a framework, but not maybe overbuilding it.
That's great. I think so budgets for sure. I think budgets help create that alignment and clarity for teams, disseminating those budgets. Were you giving, and we can talk about Parable in a second, but were you giving departments budgets that they were able to operate against? Or how did you utilize budgets within your career? What's worked for you?
Yeah. We did it on a team-by-team basis. I think in this effort, number one of the things that we did was we didn't do annual budgets. We had annual goals and we had an annual budget plan, particularly, and we were eventually part of a public company, so obviously then we did. But earlier, we were sort of reevaluating the budgets probably twice a quarter, I'd say. And this is something I would recommend to any early stage companies. You should, it's pretty typical, but I think it's a healthy thing to constantly be reevaluating the budgets, because if it was the marketing team, for example, I didn't want to give them a budget and then them feel constrained by that. Instead I gave them profitability targets for everything that they were doing. I'm saying, hey, look, this is what you need to produce, but you can as long as you could give me this sort of as long as you have your data foundation right and you can measure well, that's number one. That's more important than the budget to me. And then two, if we can measure well, then we know how our marketing spend, not just on direct response, but even on sort of more top of funnel, longer term stuff. How is it matriculating? How does this affect retention? If we can measure all of that well, then you can spend as much as you want up until some sort of point of lifetime value. Or if it's the customer service team, it's like, what is the benchmark? What is the data that we are using to denote, success here? And we can budget into that based on volume, based on what we have. So I was always more interested in KPIs of the business than I was in budget. And I felt like that sometimes if you're too budget focused, that's the tail wagging the dog. And so I was more focused on those other sorts of metrics, and then made sure, though, this is maybe the last point, is important, I guess, based on what I'm saying. We were taking our business KPIs and tracking them all the way through the P&L. And that's something I think sometimes those things get divorced, where it's like we've got our business metrics, KPIs over here, and we have our budget P&L over here. We connected that very tightly so that we were able to do the thing that I'm saying and understand the impact that we were having on the P&L. And then, you work with a lot of marketing agencies, for example, and they'll say, "Oh, you're getting an 8x ROI," and you're like, "Well, I don't see that in the P&L, so that must not be true." And it's not true. And so we made it like really our business to be able to understand how levers we were pulling in the business actually impacted the financial statement. And I wanted my team leaders to understand that really well too.
Yeah, that's great. And we found that so much about the building a budget is about the value in that is the process to create the alignment, not so much the numbers that are the output, and the thread that is the company's mission and goals that are communicated through the budget, and the autonomy that you're able to give to teams to execute, all while telling the same story, can help build those systems and can help teams really scale while giving the flexibility to do it in the way that they want. So that's awesome to hear you say that. Let's talk about some surprises. What has surprised you most about being an entrepreneur, or what do you see surprises entrepreneurs most in their journey?
The nature of being an entrepreneur, and it never ceases to surprise me, even after all these years, is how seasonal it is. You think you've got it figured. It's like you've got kids. It's like kids. It's like you think you've got it figured out. Everybody's sleeping, everybody's eating, everybody's sort of in a good place. And then it all falls apart and you have to build the whole thing over again. And so when you're a very early stage company, that process, and this is, I suppose this analogy works pretty well. It's true for babies. If you've got a baby, that's happening every maybe couple weeks or every couple months. And then as they get older, it's not so frequent, but it happens, and it's big when it happens. It's every 6 months or every year. Companies are like that too. And just when you think you've got it and you're 4 or 5 years in and everything's humming, it's like, oh, everything that we did to get to this point is out the window now, and we need to be a completely different company to do this next 3 years. And in order for that to happen, I need to be a completely different CEO. And I need a whole different set of skills. And I'm going to need to be, better than I've ever been in these other ways, and completely reinvent myself. And it's what I love about it, but it never really ceases to catch me off guard sometimes when it happens, or surprise me how hard it is to go through those transitions.
That's a great way to put it. Constant change. The only thing that changes is constant change, right? Or the only thing that's consistent is change in being an entrepreneur. So talking about seasonality, let's talk about the final season of a business. And for an entrepreneur, at least in that business, let's talk about exits. How do you know when it's the right time to exit?
I don't think I did know. What I know now is that if the business is growing and you're having fun, you should not exit the business. That's what I know now. I don't regret exiting the business, but it was growing really well and I was having a lot of fun, so I didn't need to do it. And it's easy to second guess, but we could have kept, if we had kept going, it would have gone great, and there was a lot of growth left in the business. So I think that's the rule. That's the lesson that I learned. If you if you're not having fun, or if you know what else you want to do, or you know that, for example, a new season is coming and you're going to have to go through one of these periods of growth and change in order to meet it, and you don't think that you're the right person for that, or that you're not up for another one of those sort of sleepless cycles, then I think those are good times. And the other thing I would say is that the market really decides when you're going to exit. You don't decide as much as I think people think. I hear a lot of entrepreneurs talking about certain milestones and certain multiples. I don't think I've been on both sides of it now as well. I've been on the board side doing M&A transactions. Nobody really cares about where your business is and what multiple it's going to get. PE is a little more formulaic, but most strategics certainly don't care. And there has to be a buyer, and there has to be a buyer who has a strategic reason, or even a PE firm who has a particular thesis that fits. And that is a very difficult thing to find in the world. The timing of that is really unique. And so I think the market comes to you a bit when it's ready for you. And you can say no and hope that it's there again. But I think I know plenty of entrepreneurs who have built great businesses for which there is no buyer.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear. And what do you advise those people?
Then I think you have to create your own destiny. And so if you're the ideal situation for a business like that is to be profitable and cash flowing, because then you don't care. Then you can turn the business into something that that works for you. And if you do that, my experience is that then there will be a buyer ultimately, because if you make it work for you, you'll make it work for somebody else. Like you sort of created value. If you're playing the venture game, you have to be much more sensitive to other people's timing, the venture market timing, and the timing of strategics who can pay venture multiples. And so that's just part of the fire that you're playing with when you raise venture capital.
Yep, 100%. I think on the other end of the spectrum, we see this often in professional services, in my line of work, in accounting, and law firms do this a lot, where they become the product and they build a practice that is super successful but doesn't have any equity value, and there's no way to exit. So they're forced to just shut the door and take their savings. And so it's another approach to it. But to the extent that you can build something that has enterprise value, that has something that someone would want to acquire, it's a different approach, but it's highly advisable. All right. So let's talk about Parable. Tell me, it's your new gig. Where did it come from? Where did the idea come from? And what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, I think so. When we built TeePublic, we did not raise venture. We did not raise debt. We were profitable every year that we were in business. And that was the thesis for that business. And for my co-founder and I, Josh, was we really wanted to try to build a cash flowing, profitable growth business. And we just didn't see anyone doing that. And we thought that would sort of be the fun project. TeePublic was in its business model well positioned to run that way, as it was very cash light business. And part of the forcing function of not having outside capital was that we had to be, and we've been discussing this, really focused, really aligned, really judicious with how we spent our resources. And that enabled us to get a lot done and move really quickly with a very small team. As we were growing, we maintained, $1 million, $1.5 million of revenue per employee for pretty much the whole life of the company. But as we got bigger, and we had scaled, and there was complexity, and then we were part of a public company and they had all of their complexity, and I started doing board work in larger contexts, I was left wondering how to get back to the speed and agility that we had when we were 30 people, and why we could get so much done, and how seemingly with 5 times as many people, it didn't feel like we were getting anything more accomplished necessarily.
Why did you feel that way? Why does that happen?
Well, I think that there's just a massive data gap here. So as much as you've got, I agree with everything you said about good budget planning and how good budget planning is at best a forcing mechanism for answering hard questions around focus and around alignment. Goal planning and strategy planning is all meant to do that as well. But then you have to go out and actually execute. And when you are small, the feedback loops and visibility that you have in that executional phase, whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months, are very high fidelity. You really understand what everybody's, how the company is working and what it's working on and what impact that is having. You can follow the water through the pipes and you can find where it's leaking. You can see where it's getting to the other side and where it's not. And when you're hundreds of people or thousands of people, you completely lose that sense. There's leaks in the pipes, but you don't know, like, wait, where's that water coming from and why did it get there? And some water's getting through, but I don't know which. And so in the 90s, really for 100 years, from 1890 to the 1990s, people would say, I know that 50% of my advertising budget works, but I don't know which 50. And then over the last couple decades, that changed. And nobody says that anymore because we know. And so in thinking about why this problem, persists, I think it's because at enterprise scale, there's just a massive data gap around operations. And it becomes, everything is based on proxy data. It's like, well, the plan is that we're going to work on these 4 priorities. Did we? What else did we work on? A bunch of other stuff probably happened. There was customer fires and there was unplanned work and real life happened in between our plan. And then we come back and in our measurement cycle and we got it or we didn't get it and we try to retro that. And even then we're opining about what happened, but there's no real telemetry data. There's nothing quantitative about it. And so when I was off and I started, playing with large language models, the thing that really occurred to me and my co-founders is that, we're moving from a world where we had to speak technology's language to a world where technology speaks our language. And what I started thinking about was the problem that I'm talking about is an unstructured data problem because we work in language. We don't work in code. We work in language. We talk to each other and we write to each other and we brainstorm with each other, and that's all language. But now that language can be data, and it can be analyzed and it can be quantified and it can be structured so that we can understand better how we're working and why we're working the way that we are, and whether or not our intention is lining up with our attention. and I think that's the root of it for me is that, obviously time is finite and it's precious to all of us. It's precious to every single employee at every single company, and equally so to the CEO and to to the newest, most entry-level employee at an enterprise. It's equally valuable to both of them. As humans, it's equally valuable. And we spend so much of our time at work. The only thing that I can really think of to make that time more purposeful and more meaningful is to know that the work that I'm doing is impactful and that it's aligned and that it's generative and that the whole that I am part of, that my time is being well spent in that way. And I think that the tragedy that happens in a lot of larger contexts is how much wasted work there is and how much wasted time there is and how bureaucracy or how systems or how simply miscommunication leads to wasted time, and that is, that is something I think we should not stand for.
Yeah,
I think we should really be, we should honor everybody's time.
Yep.
And make sure that it's being used in a meaningful and purposeful and impactful way. And I've probably done 1,000 interviews in my career. I've almost never interviewed someone who says that doesn't say, I want to make an impact. I want what if I'm in this job, I want it to be impactful.
Yeah.
And I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
And I agreed. So how do we start to make sense of that? And so we're trying to sharpen our understanding of how we behave and how AI is going to change the way that we work. And so ultimately Parable is a foundational system for helping companies transition to an AI driven workplace.
It's awesome. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in board meetings where the department head missed the budget and there's so many more questions about why, even though this is the person that is responsible for executing on the plan. Why did you miss budget? Where were you? Where are we allocating resources? Where are we spending time that we shouldn't? And it's hard to quantify that. It's been impossible to quantify that, where the inputs have gone. We can see the outputs. You can see we didn't hit the sales targets. We didn't generate enough pipeline. But it's hard to determine. It's been hard and impossible to determine what inputs worked and what inputs didn't. And so I'm super excited to see how you guys are able to execute on that and bring that to light.
Yeah, those are all lagging indicators. Managing outcomes are lagging indicators. And I believe and we talked about this in the beginning, I believe in leading indicators. I believe in inputs. I believe that, the work that we do is ultimately what is responsible for the outcome. And so that's where all of our focus should be. Outcomes, it's like, well, of course there's an outcome, but how did we create it? And if we don't understand, equally insidious, missing a number is bad and not understanding why. Hitting a number and not understanding why is just as bad.
Right.
Because you're not going to do it again.
Yep.
Right. And so I'm just fascinated with how we can get more data around inputs and around execution to help us understand what's working and what's not working. And I think it does come right back to budgets because, either we under-resourced that project, we under-focused on that project, or we lack the sort of hard skills or capabilities to execute on that project. And it's rarely the third thing. In all of my experiences at companies, it's rarely that we just can't do it. It's like impossible. We just don't know. It's usually one of the first two. It's like we underinvested in this, either in money or time.
Wow. And so in your initial learnings or through your time to date with Parable, what are those metrics that you're advising companies to lean into, to focus on?
Well, first it depends. I would say companies live along a spectrum, which is like they are either focused on cost efficiency on one end or on speed and growth on the other. And then you have some companies who really do have to find a balance between those two things. I find more companies actually at the ends that where they're in a season of a company and it's one of those spectrums. But sometimes it's like, no, we kind of need to maintain a certain growth rate, and it's, we're just trying to get and that's hard too. And I've been there. So once we understand where they are in that spectrum, that colors a bit, what we do for them. Part of, I think, the transformation to AI is that I don't think software is going to be as out of the box and formulaic. I think it's going to be more tech-enabled services, which is how we model ourselves. And so if we're starting with someone first, we're going to do a diagnostic of how the company is spending its collective time. So in aggregate, by project, by team, by strategic priority, by operational process, how are we spending our collective time? And give the leadership an aggregated and anonymized roll-up, which is a P&L to command center. It's like, hey, here's you have $100 million in payroll. Here's how that's being invested in terms of time. Now, depending on what your goals are, you're trying to drive more profitability, you're trying to drive more speed, you're trying to drive more growth. Then we can start thinking about, okay, how should AI, and we sort of guide them through this process, how should AI get you there? How should the organization change as a result of now understanding this data? And 100% of the time that we present this data to a leadership group, it surprises them to find how little time is ultimately spent on the strategic priorities that they feel are going to be determinant of that company's success. And there's a lot of that has to do with a lack of understanding of the sort of fixed costs of operating the business. And if you go talk to employees, they understand this well because they live it. But leadership often doesn't understand all of the things that need to happen to just keep the lights on. And those are the fixed costs. They understand in the P&L what the fixed labor costs are, maybe what OpEx kind of always seems to be, but they don't know why it is that. And so the first thing we're trying to do is give them a better understanding of why it costs what it costs to keep the lights on in the business. What is left over is what is available to work on the strategy and drive towards the mission. And so then we say, okay, you have a customer success team over here who probably for years have been advocating for system changes that would reduce their keep the lights on work. But maybe they were never able to get the budget for that because they didn't have a sharp case. But now we can say, well, if we reduced the amount of time they had to spend on this sort of, convoluted system, and we could then shift that time and we can measure, this is the sort of important part. Not only can we create that efficiency with AI, with let's say another AI tool, but efficiency doesn't count unless you do something with it. So it's like we could create some automation that makes everyone's work easier or go faster. It's like, then what? Well, unless we take that time and we then concentrate it on something that is generative and valuable, then we've not created any efficiency. We've just sort of like moved time around a little bit. And so I think the real value comes at that step when we identify essentially where we are spending time that is suboptimal, and then we measure how to move that time into something that is more aligned and more strategic.
Wow. That's awesome. I'm super excited to see the outcomes that you're able to help drive and follow the journey. That's awesome. So I'm going to take it back a little bit. Couple more rapid fire questions to wrap us up here. Talking about your entrepreneurial journey as a whole, what's been the best decision you've ever made?
I think probably trusting, once I've gotten, in the specific case of TeePublic, once I got some feedback in those first 2 years about what was working in the business, the inputs that were driving, and we found a little bit of a data correlation between how the marketplace was working, and we got signs of life. If I was a PhD statistician, my correlation probably wasn't good enough, but I felt I made a big bet based on that early data and just said, okay, this is the business. I'm going all in on this kind of North Star, which was about really focusing on the artist side of that marketplace and not the consumer side. So the supply side, not the demand side, and we went all in on the supply. And we said, the demand will come if we get the supply right. And we're going to spend 95% of our effort on that. And I think that was certainly for that business, the best decision that we made. And that led to the best outcome that I've had.
That's awesome. So having conviction to to execute on one specific thesis.
Choosing a North Star and going for that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Just a couple one-liner questions to take us out. We talked about AI, but what's one technology trend you're most excited about right now? Could be in the world of AI, outside of the world of AI.
I think it's agentic AI.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Is there a book or a resource that you recommend to founders and entrepreneurs the most?
It depends on what stage, but Lean Startup, 0 to 1, Good to Great, Radical Candor. Those are all sort of, I think, like 101.
Cool. What's the most undervalued skill that entrepreneurs need to have?
I think it's what we talked about. I think it's not making perfect the enemy of good.
Awesome. And then lastly, what's one question you wish that you were asked earlier in your career that you would ask other founders and entrepreneurs?
I think it would be, who are you surrounding yourself with? And how are they going to inform and inspire who you become?
Amazing. Adam, thank you so much for the time. So much useful information for our listeners. We'll have to do it again. And congrats on Parable. Where can people find you if they're interested in following Parable, following you?
Yeah, parable.work is our website, and from there you can find our LinkedIn, where we write about operations, budget planning, resource allocation, time. So those are sort of the two best places. And if there are executives and CFOs who are thinking about how AI is going to transform their business and how it should change, or will change ways of working, then we're excited to talk to those people.
Awesome. Adam, thank you so much. You're an incredible human, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Awesome getting to see you, Jeff.
Thanks for tuning in to 5 to 50. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with other business owners looking to grow. Do you have a question or a topic you'd like us to cover? Connect with us on LinkedIn or reach out to us at ProSeer, where we're empowering entrepreneurs with real-time, actionable insights and financial infrastructure through smarter accounting, tax, and financial strategies. Let's keep this conversation going. Together, we'll help our businesses thrive. Talk to you soon.